After months of preparations, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched a major military operation against Ukraine. Speaking on national television, Mr. Putin urged Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms and go home. He warned that anyone who interfered in Russia's actions would face retaliation. Loud explosions have been now heard in Ukraine in lots of different cities as the Russian assault has begun. President Biden said that the world will hold Russia accountable for its aggression. NATO has condemned what it called a reckless and unprovoked attack. Well, let's cross now to our correspondent James Waterhouse, who is in Kiev for us. James, explosions already being heard.
Yes, that's right. We've heard 5 or 6, well, actually probably up to 8 now, very faint explosions out of view. They resemble a faint thunderclap, if you like. We've had a statement from the Russian Ministry of Defence. They claim they are not attacking cities with rockets or artillery. They describe high-precision weapons that they're using to target military infrastructure in Ukraine, aviation and air defences. The ministry says the civil population is not at risk. Many here, I don't think, will be believing that this morning, or finding out very hard when you're waken up to the sound of explosions. It happened at around 5 a.m. We're fairly central, and those sounds of explosions happened right across the horizon. So if you're stretching from the commercial part of the city to my left, right across the Dnipro River and over the past St Michael's Cathedral over to my right. So that sounded quite large scale. And then we had reports this morning from colleagues in Kramatorsk to the east. They heard a large explosion there, and a government official has told the BBC that troops have been crossing into Odessa to the south, very close to the Russian border, as well as in the city of Kharkiv to the northeast, which is 25 miles from the Russian border, as well as troop movements in Belgorod province in southwest Russia. So the reports and signs this morning are that this is a large-scale escalation of this crisis, where we first saw Russian troops building up last April. The focal point for the last couple of days certainly has been the increase in fighting in the rebel-held territories in the Donbass region to the east, 400 miles away. President Putin gave an order to move troops in after officially recognising it. It's not, the big question mark is whether he's going to push further. He said he recognised the whole of Luhansk and Donetsk, which represents a much bigger land grab. We've just heard a siren go off for the first time. We haven't heard that before. The streets are unusually quiet. The signature cobbled roads that occupy that weave through the heart of Kiev here in front of St Michael's Square, they are quieter than normal. Ukrainians have often shared the grab bags that they use, the air raid shelters that they would go to. They include underground bars and restaurants. But this is a very worrying morning for people in the capital city and beyond. This is what the fear had been all along, not just when these Russian troops started to build up from last April, but for the 8 years of Russian aggression that has been sustained by Moscow since the last Russian-leaning president was toppled in a revolution just to my left on Independence Square down there in the Maidan, which right now I can barely see anyone there. There's no traffic that I can see, and there's certainly no one walking through it. So this is a very, very worrying time, and an escalation that is taking real form here in the capital city.
James, can I ask you this? Are you happy to stay on with us now that the sirens are blaring in the city?
Yes, I am, yes.
Okay. This is the first time that those sirens have gone off in the city. How prepared is the city for attack?
Well, let's start with the military answer to that question. Ukraine has said that it's had a force of 200,000. It is a much stronger armed forces than it was 8 years ago. It's received billions of dollars of funding and training, and the message has been, we will fight in the event of an escalation. But the sound of a siren echoing through this historic city will cause a lot of concern. Kievans, Ukrainians who live here in the capital city, have made very crude plans. You speak to people and they say, oh, we would fight, but they concede they don't know what that means. And now we're getting the Russian Ministry of Defence saying it's targeting specific military sites. And then President Putin adding that the people of Ukraine will be free to choose who they want to run the country. And that will be causing real worry. And yes, Ukrainians are used to living under this tension, this unpredictability imposed on them by their much bigger neighbour. But when you hear the faint sound of missiles landing, government officials are saying there are both crews and missiles being fired on targets here in the capital and clearly in other locations in the country, that is going to cause a lot of worry. And those anxieties are now fixating on what is happening now, no longer the what if, because the what is now happening.
Now, the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, is now calling on national security and the Defence Council to declare martial law. That council is now expected to hold an urgent meeting. Did the President expect a full-on assault on his country?
I think it was a worry. I think for the past few months, the narratives have been very different. You've had a growing urgency from the West in terms of the forecasts they gave. We've heard more world leaders even predict specific days that there would be an invasion. And President Zelensky and his officials have said two things. Don't worry, because that plays into Russia's hands. And they've also said no intelligence we've seen suggests that a large-scale invasion is imminent. That's been a source of frustration to many. So, well, who are we supposed to believe? You tell us to stay calm, but then the rest of the world are saying something much more serious is happening. So yesterday we saw very much a change of tone, a state of emergency being declared, more than 30,000 reservists being conscripted, being made to join the armed forces. The Defence Minister, Alexei Reznikov, addressed troops and he said there will be losses and ordeals ahead. Not language you use if you are hoping for a diplomatic outcome to this crisis. So I think we are now starting to see a merging of language, and the question is now, well, if they do what they say, they will defend themselves. There are question marks in the east. We are now, there is reported troop movements by Russia in the southwest. This is something large scale, and it will be only Ukraine to defend itself, because not one NATO boot will set foot on Ukrainian soil as things stand, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and this is Russia expressing itself in its own unique way that it does not want. It wants that taken off the table. It wants the alliance to push right back. So you have this global face-off between the world's superpowers and Ukraine, and cities like Kiev at the heart of it.
James Waterhouse for now. Thank you, James Waterhouse in Kiev for us. Let's cross now to our Moscow correspondent, Caroline Davies, who is in Rostov. Thank you, Caroline, very much for joining me. The Russian President Vladimir Putin announcing what he is describing as a military operation in the Donbass region. Are we witnessing the start of World War III?
Victoria, at this stage, there are very many fears that this is the start of war in Europe. This morning, just before 6 a.m, we had this address from President Putin where he talked about the fact that he was starting this military offensive. This came after last night. There were letters published from the separatist leaders saying that they wanted to have assistance from President Putin against what they referred to as Ukrainian aggression. Now, of course, throughout all of this, Ukraine has consistently denied that it has any aggression or intention of trying to take over these separatist-held areas. And, of course, it has been Russia that has had a troop build-up on Ukraine's borders of an estimated 190,000 troops. So, of course, again, this assessment by the Kremlin is seen very much as a false flag attack on the situation, on what's happening here. Now, in terms of what happened next, we know that President Putin had previously said that he hadn't sent troops yet into this region, that it was waiting on developments and seeing what was needed by those separatist leaders. So when this announcement was made last night, there was a very real concern that this was the start of something more. And then, of course, that confirmation by President Putin just before 6 a.m. And in terms of some of his words, I can read some of what he said. He said that all responsibility for bloodshed will be on the conscience of the ruling regime in Ukraine. And he repeated again that the position that NATO expansion to be included in Ukraine was unacceptable, and said Russia had been left with no choice but to defend itself against what it said were threats emanating from Ukraine. Now, of course, many of the rest of the world would strongly disagree with this.
That was Caroline Davis there in Rostov-on-Don, just explaining some of the things that seem to be behind this Russian aggression towards Ukraine. First, this idea of the allegations from Moscow that the government in Kiev is committing genocide against ethnic Russians in separatist areas. That has been strongly denied by Ukraine. Also, of course, NATO expansion as well, something that has come up time and time again in the weeks in the run-up to today. The Russian President Vladimir Putin announcing now a military operation in the Donbas region, urging soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers in eastern Ukraine, to lay down weapons and return to their homes. There has, of course, been response from around the world, including the United States. The US President Joe Biden vowing that the world will hold Russia accountable, predicting major loss of life. President Biden will be addressing Americans on Thursday today about the consequences he says that Russia will face. Russia, just a bit of breaking news coming in here. Russia's defense ministry has denied attacking Ukrainian cities, saying it is targeting military infrastructure, air defense and air forces with high precision weapons. This is according to the country's state agency, RIA, citing the ministry. Let's cross now to Steve Rosenberg, and actually, no, we've got David Willis here. Let's speak to David. David, we've heard the statement from President Biden, and he said that the world is praying for Ukraine, the world praying for Ukraine, whilst President Putin preys on Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. And the lights are still on way after midnight in the building just behind me. President Biden has been briefed by members of his national security team, including the Defense Secretary and the Secretary of State. And he issued that statement, of course, as you mentioned, decrying the attack, calling it unprovoked and unjustified, and accused Vladimir Putin of carrying out what he called a premeditated war that will lead to a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Now, Mr. Biden has also been speaking in the last few minutes to the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, and I've just been handed a statement in regard to that phone call. And it says, I'll read it to you, President Zelensky reached out to me tonight and we just finished speaking. I condemned this unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces. I briefed him on the steps that we are taking to rally international condemnation, including tonight at the United Nations Security Council. And he asked me to call on the leaders of the world to speak out clearly against President Putin's flagrant aggression and to stand with the people of Ukraine. Now, tomorrow, President Biden will be meeting with the leaders of the G7 and is then due to announce a new package of economic sanctions against Russia in a televised news briefing.